These community activists are fighting voter suppression with the best tool they have, community organizing. They canvass year-round and ask residents what their community needs to thrive.
So we're just canvassing the neighborhood, asking folks what would it look like for their community to thrive, meaning like succeed, get better.
These community organizers with Black leaders organizing for communities, or BLOC, are building community power, a way of building a voting bloc that is more self-conscious of its needs and is organized enough to lobby for them. Something residents say fits the needs of the community.
When you come door to door and talk to people like they're humans, I think that's a better fit for this neighborhood, because people are already afraid. You don't want to believe everything you see on TV. And when a person confronts you face to face, it's more personal. That's what I think. I think that's more caring.
And they're helping residents overcome the numerous obstacles to voting, a crucial task, says Angela Lang, the group's founder and executive director.
And the challenges around voting are being able to constantly limit early voting hours, taking away polling places, taking away weekend voting, where so many people utilize. But then also we have photo ID in our state, and not everybody has an ID. Not everyone has the most up-to-date ID.
The biggest obstacle to voting in Wisconsin is the state's voter ID law that had a direct impact on the 2016 election. The law was passed by Republicans who claimed requiring voters to show state ID or photo ID and proof of residence would clamp down on voter fraud. But you didn't always need an ID to vote in Wisconsin.
Wisconsin had a long progressive tradition of great voting rights, great access, same-day registration. We regularly compete with Minnesota for the top turnout in the country. And then in the Tea Party wave of 2010, we got Scott Walker and a very right-wing Republican legislature.
But that changed in 2011 when Wisconsin passed a voter ID law among other voter suppression efforts, says Robert Craig of Citizen Action of Wisconsin, a Milwaukee-based grassroots pro-democracy nonprofit.
These voter suppression laws, which they passed through consecutively, ended up in court. We actually are the lead plaintiffs in one of the major lawsuits. They're a little like Jim Crow in that a lot of them just, the additive effect of all of them reduces voter turnout, but many of them are designed to seem reasonable on face.
Having an ID can sometimes be a challenge. If people lose an ID, I know I have to get mine updated, and I'm dreading it because I don't have time to stand in line for hours at the DMV.
The evidence is clear that while widespread voter fraud does not exist, voter ID laws disproportionately impact African American and Latino voters, who are far less likely to have ID than their white counterparts.
And so they knew very well it would have a disproportionate impact on low-income folks, which in our system is disproportionately folks of color, and that those were predominantly Democratic voters. And if you create that hurdle, you would reduce voter turnout. And in fact, there was a massive reduction in turnout in Milwaukee among African American and especially African American and to some extent Latinx voters from 2012 to 2016 when it was fully implemented.
While white voter participation dropped 2% between 2012 and the 2016 election, Black voter turnout dropped nearly 20 points.
Those people we know have been deterred or downright denied the ability to vote. And these are people who have been voting for years. They're clearly citizens. Nobody really disputes that they're eligible to vote. But nonetheless, because of this arbitrary law, they still are unable to vote because they can't get a piece of documentation that the state demands of them.
And even if the requirements of the voter ID law don't outright disqualify people from voting, a lack of information about voting requirements contributed to 200,000 Wisconsin voters being deterred from voting in the 2016 election, in which Trump beat Clinton by 20,000 votes, according to a study by Priorities USA. So when it comes to going to the polls, education is power.
I presented an ID. It didn't match my my previous or my current address. I had my old address on it, but I knew that all I had to do was just show my picture, and they should only be looking at my picture. And they tried to turn me away and say that my address didn't match. But I knew the rules and I knew my rights, so I stayed there. And we had to get the chief election inspector to say, no, yep, she's right, let her vote.
The Trump years were not kind to Black cities like Milwaukee, which is long ranked last or near the bottom on indicators of social and economic well-being for African American residents. But out of these struggles, a new kind of voter organizing has been born.
Thank you. I'll show be in contact.
All right.
Yeah, we got a little puppy.
So did we get your email address or anything?
We wanted to disrupt some of the transactional nature of typical electoral politics in communities of color. And so we're a year-round civic engagement organization. Even with COVID, we had to scale back a lot, but we're one of the only organizations that has a year-round field program. We're canvassing 24/7 around issues and around the things that people care about.
Joanne Robinson is lead ambassador for Block, a group she's been with since it's launched in 2017. As member organizers are quick to point out, Block doesn't just ask people to go to the polls every couple years. Through direct community engagement, their organizing-based approach focuses on mobilizing and uplifting neighborhoods so that residents develop a strong sense of self-advocacy and shared purpose that gives them something to vote for and more power to ensure their interests are served by elected officials.
We are working to fight towards issues that I have and that my friends, family, neighbors, and everyone has. That I don't qualify for home ownership programs. I was unable to rent because I have an eviction on my name. I was homeless a few times here.
Block hires people from the community, many of whom have experienced the same challenges common in deeply segregated Milwaukee: incarceration, lack of access to quality housing, jobs, and childcare.
And what is, I think, so beautiful about it is that there's people from our community. People, there are some people on our staff that haven't had their voting rights restored yet, but yet they're still knocking doors, they're still educating people. And so I think there's something beautiful about being able to have people from the community being able to have these conversations.
For the 2018 elections, just a year after they launched, Block knocked on over 227,000 doors and spoke to more than 20,000 voters. A year Democrats made big gains, sweeping all statewide offices, including governor and lieutenant governor. But these victories also exposed the depth of voter disenfranchisement in Wisconsin. Considered one of the most severely gerrymandered states. Even though Democrats won a majority of the vote in 2018, they only won 38 of 99 seats in the state assembly.
In Wisconsin, it was especially egregious. They paid outside right-wing lawyers a lot of public money to have a secret process to do maps that would withstand any Democratic surge. They statistically did a whole lot of modeling to show that the maps they came up with were impossible for the Democrats to win in.
So even though Democrats defeated Governor Scott Walker, who passed voter ID laws and gerrymandering, they are powerless to repeal those policies, which is the point of gerrymandering. 2020 brought new challenges, namely the COVID-19 pandemic, which hit cities like Milwaukee especially hard, and upended how Block could operate. It was no longer safe for ambassadors to go door to door. Despite these challenges, Block ambassadors made over 250,000 phone calls and sent over 550,000 text messages.
We were able last year to at least do some literature drops, so we weren't comfortable having face-to-face conversations. We were able to leave literature on people's doors, so at least people were getting that information. Last year, I think we had over 220,000 phone calls were made with our ambassadors, and they sent over 550,000 text messages over the course of just a few months last year. And what I always want to note when I say those numbers is that these numbers were hit by our ambassadors who are not immune to the same things that we're fighting for. And so a part about being a part of the community that you're organizing is that the same challenges that the broader community is dealing with, so is our team.
Record voter turnout helped Biden win Wisconsin in 2020. But the pandemic, voter ID laws, and other voter suppression efforts resulted in stagnant turnout among Black voters in Milwaukee.
We were able to hold the line as much as possible, and there was a little bit of an enthusiasm gap. Not everyone was excited for Biden. We're in the middle of a pandemic. There's all sorts of challenges. And again, that's why we think about democracy in a holistic sense, because a lot of the challenges from the pandemic, people may want to vote, but they're not necessarily thinking about it if they are trying to figure out how to survive, or, they're an essential worker and they're just trying to make ends meet.
Lang argues numbers don't tell the whole story.
For us, being able to see more people that we've been engaging finally come around, to see people come to us and said, hey, I want to get involved with you all. I want to be a leader. I want to do what you're doing. There are times now we're knocking on people's doors who at one point were skeptical of the work that we do and are like, hey, how can I do what you're doing? And they end up getting involved with us in our work.
Lang says Democrats must pass legislation that prevents states from Wisconsin from suppressing the votes of people of color. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act would ban gerrymandering and discriminatory voting laws like Wisconsin's voter ID. but Republicans are blocking it with a Jim Crow-era rule called the filibuster.
There's nothing to suggest a sprawling federal takeover is necessary,
which a handful of Democrats have refused to reform.
We understand that in order to have a Democratic majority, you need people to turn out, which means you need to eliminate things like voter suppression. And so it's incredibly unfortunate and a little mind-boggling that Democrats have this power, but for whatever reason are unable to actually wield it and to use it for something effective. And it's going to come back, probably sooner rather than later. It's going to come back to bite them.
In future installments of the 6-part series, we'll learn how voting rights activists in Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, and Nevada are fighting gerrymandering and voter suppression. With Cameron Granadino, this is Jessel Noor.